Hello there guys, my name is MrYorkiesWorld, welcome back to the channel. In today's video I'm going to be reviewing a fantastic ATC tool called PF3 by Oncourse software, which has recently been made compatible with Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now if you're not aware, ATC software is a way that you can have virtual air traffic control services inside of your simulator. So in case you don't want to fly online, or if you've not got time to fly online, etc., and you still want to have that realistic ATC experience, it adds a virtual pilot, a virtual co-pilot, and a virtual ATC voice, which helps you to navigate as you would in the real world around airports and around the virtual skies. And it guides you properly from A to B within your flight, just the same as ATC on VATSIM would, for example. Now before we get into it, I'd like to thank Dave March for kindly providing this software to me to review. I'm very excited to delve into this tool, which is extremely feature-packed and definitely adds a new level of immersion to the simulator experience. So let's get right into it. So to begin with, I would highly recommend before or after you've purchased the software that you either read through the included help files and documentation located in the installation directory, or that you go to the website. I'll put a link in the description to it and have a read through it there. It gives you a really good idea how to set everything up and get it working properly, and it also has its own sort of quick tutorial which sort of allows you to get used to the software very quickly and easily during your first flight using it. You will need to have FSUIPC installed on your system as well to use this software, and you'll need to run and download, or download and run, Make Runways to configure the database files for the tool to run. Both FSUIPC and Make Runways can be downloaded from the link that I will also put in the description as well. Now you can also find the instructions on how to do this either in the help documentation included or via the online tutorials that you can find on YouTube. Overall, the process of installation was very quick and simple in my case. I already had FSUIPC, so I only needed to download Make Runways, which again didn't take very long. It's all pretty self-explanatory, especially if you've already got existing experience of installing add-ons and sim-related software and tools. So in terms of the software interface then, so I really like the simplistic look of the PF3 interface. It's simple, yet detailed enough to give you everything that you need. You can choose from a variety of different themes, or skins as they're called, which is great if you want to change the way the program looks in order to match sort of your workspace. And all the options are really easy to find as well, so you can get right into configuring your first flight using PF3. Now there is also a range of help pop-ups and question marks in each window that you can hover over and get sort of like a tool tip, and that'll tell you a little bit more about what certain options do. And also, if you look at the top of most screens, you'll find an explanation of how certain options work and how to configure certain options, so that you always have a visual guide how to configure the flight perfectly to your preference. Now moving on to the features of the program, this is going to be the longest point of this particular video. I can't possibly go into full detail about all of the features because we truly would be here forever. This is an extremely complex piece of software with many different variables, and it can seem pretty overwhelming at first, at least when you're just getting in to know the software at least. As we can expect in most ATC programs for flight sim, we have got the opportunity to modify a lot of different parameters such as SIDS, stars, altitudes, waypoints, and a lot more. We also have the opportunity to choose different voice sets to make things sound a little bit more realistic and immersive in the sim. One of the main features is the ability to load flight plans from either the simulator itself, such as MSFS or P3D, into the program. PF3 accepts PLN files, which can be produced either online, such as through SimBrief, or you can indeed create your own flight plan directly inside of the simulator, save it as a PLN file, and then load it into PF3 for further editing. Now you can go in and modify your cruise level and even tell PF3 when you want to start descending based on real-world restrictions. Now I found it helpful to use Avlosoft's EFB version 2 for MSFS in order to show the SIDS and stars, as this shows you all the different speeds and altitude restrictions which can then be programmed into PF3 to make the overall experience a little bit more realistic. Of course, you also have the option to change your call sign. PF3 has probably hundreds of different airlines that can be spoken by ATC. However, you can also select none if the airline that you want is not in the list, and you can literally manually enter it into the call sign, and ATC will read it aloud that way. For example, I wasn't able to find Jet2 Airlines in the list, so I selected none in the airline box, and I just put EXS and then the flight number into the call sign box instead, which works absolutely fine because the ATC will just read out Echo X-Ray Sierra or EXS 1234. Now, there is also a virtual co-pilot mode, which can handle a variety of tasks depending on what you've set it to. Now, personally, I use the CP mode 2, which handles all the communications for me, answers ATC instructions, etc. This is helpful if you need to do a long-haul flight and potentially come away from the computer for a few hours. You're not going to be there to answer ATC, and you can guarantee that PF3 will do that for you. So the co-pilot will answer and acknowledge the PF3 ATC instructions, such as, altitude changes, things like that. There is also a very useful tool called the taxi guidance system, which gives you verbal cues when to turn when you're taxiing around an airport, as well as giving you visual cues as well if you want it to. This is helpful if you're taxiing in a very complex airport that you're not familiar with. So in my case, I don't use this feature because I use the taxi path feature, which comes as part of the EFB program that I use anyway. But it's still definitely a useful feature for those of you who don't have an external EFB program like me. You can choose the probability that ATC will ask you to hold at a certain waypoint as well. This is done as a matter of percentage, so if you enter 100%, obviously that's going to be a definite, you're going to be asked to hold, and obviously if it's 0, you won't be asked to hold at all. So you get the idea. This adds a little bit more realism, and it allows you to sort of have a bit of time to descend, or to slow down, or to avoid other traffic, etc., if you're flying online, for example. So there are a few other points that I should probably mention about PF3. So you can also declare emergencies to ATC, and they will give you vectors to land either at your departure airport or at the nearest airport to you. You can also request direct to certain waypoints in your flight as well, which is really handy if you want to take a shortcut to wherever you're going. Again, this just adds another nice touch of realism, and I really like those features. So another point I forgot to mention was the realistic background chatter. Now this is an option that you can turn on or off depending on your personal preference, and it just adds a little bit more realism. You can hear other aircraft interacting with ATC, asking for clearances, asking for directions and things like that, just stuff that you'd expect to hear in the real world. So that is, again, another option to add a little bit of immersion in there as well. There are an abundance of different voice sets available. I did mention that a few moments ago. These voices will also vary depending on whereabouts in the world you are. And you can go into the options inside of PF3 and choose which ones you want to hear and which ones you'd rather not. There are a few voices which do sound quite robotic. And so personally, I decided to go in and sort of manually deactivate a few of them just to my preference. Obviously, you as the pilot will also have your own virtual voice, which can be selected and changed to your liking. The same goes for the co-pilot as well. And there are a range of male and female voices as well from different places around the world and in different accents and things like that. One thing I would recommend that you do before each flight is either enter into the advanced options and any tweaks page and change the FAF altitude, which is the final approach fixed altitude and distance of your runway, or you can sort of leave it as it is. Personally, it adds a little bit more realism to actually go in and manually edit that each time. It just helps to make sure that ATC descends you in time to capture the glide slope at your destination airport. The information for this is usually found on the star charts, or in my case, via my EFB program. If you're using MSFS or P3D, there's also an additional section called View P3D/MSFS Options, which lets you customize how ATC text appears. For example, you can have a separate window appear in the sim showing you exactly what ATC has said last. It's basically a captions window, and you can also move that window to another screen if you've got one, so it doesn't interfere with the immersion that you're experiencing during the flight. And finally, an option that I really like is the option to configure which gate or stand ATC will ask you to sort of head over to after you touch down at your destination. It's completely customizable. I really like this because it lets you plan ahead and choose your arrival gate before you even start, and you don't need to remember this or rush around and, at the last minute. The software will remember what gate you've chosen for arrival and tell you to report directly there once you've landed and exited the runway, and it'll also give you the vectors, sort of like taxi paths that you can use to get there as well. Again, there are probably a million and one other features that I haven't mentioned in this review, but I thought it'd be better to focus on sort of the main features and the features that I personally found to be the most impressive and most useful in my particular setup. So in terms of SIDs and stars then, these are chosen before you actually start the flight. You would normally plan which SID and star you'll be using outside the sim, and then once you've decided, you can enter into PF3 and go to the SIDs and stars page to choose which runway you're going to be using. You can disable certain runways to make sure you're always given a certain runway for arrival, for example, or for departure. And you can also define the name of the SID or star that ATC will read out for you. You can further customize SIDs and stars by loading into your PLN file inside of PF3 and going to the Adjust Altitudes, SIDs, Stars and Holds page, which gives you even more in-depth customization options that you can go through. Now, a few things to remember. So for one thing I did notice about PF3, it could seem a little bit daunting to some people at first, especially if you've just gotten into flight sim. It's a very, very complex program with a lot of different features and options, hence the reason why I simply cannot cover absolutely everything in this one review. I'm just focusing on the main points that I like. One thing I'd say to those of you who do struggle with this sort of thing is to leave a comment, and I'll be more than happy to try and answer as best I can. Alternatively, there's also a support forum that you can go to on the Oncourse software website, which I'll leave a link to in the description below. Another thing that I noticed, at least from what I could tell, again, there isn't currently a way for ATC to automatically choose you a SID or a star for your flight, so you do have to go in there and manually enter these each time you plan your flight and load it into PF3. There may well be a way to do this that I've not discovered as of yet at the time of recording this, but my understanding is that this is currently not possible from directly within the simulator and within the software. Now, some people might be slightly disappointed by this, but I actually think it works pretty well because it encourages you to study the charts, plan your flight more efficiently as you would in the real world. So you can definitely use that to your advantage if you're trying to be more realistic. Now, in terms of the in-sim interface, apart from what I've said about the captions window and things like that, you can literally begin your flight by pressing the 0 key on your keyboard. And now the 0 key on the keyboard not being the num 0, but being the row of 1 to 0 at the top. These are hotkeys, and they can be sort of viewed and customized inside of PF3's options. In case they conflict with the simulator, there is an option to go through them and enable them or disable them. So if you've got another add-on that uses a particular hotkey that PF3 uses, you can ask PF3 not to use that particular hotkey. And you can find out more about hotkeys and what they do in the included documentation or by looking online. As a basic guide, the only key that you're really going to need to press is the 0 key for most functions if you're using a virtual co-pilot mode 2, for example. And that's just for things such as asking for clearance, requesting taxi. The rest, normally, especially if you're using that virtual co-pilot mode 2, will be done automatically by the virtual co-pilot, which is nice. PF3 will also be aware of AI aircraft inside the simulator as well, and although it cannot directly control those AI aircraft, it will try to navigate the situation so that you don't crash or get in the way of incoming traffic, etc. This is always a limitation of ATC programs, which cannot really be helped. And in my case, I don't really use live air traffic anyway, so it doesn't affect me personally. So in terms of sim compatibility, as I mentioned earlier, PF3 is compatible with P3D and MSFS, but it's also compatible with FS9 and FSX, which is great. I've got MSFS and P3D, so that's all I need it for, but I know there's still quite a few people out there that are using FSX and FS9, so you'll be happy to know that it is compatible with those simulators as well. The software itself has plenty of options to customize and plenty of ways to add additional realism and immersion into your simulator experience. It's great for those of you who, like myself, don't really have time to fly online and prefer to have sort of like a more offline, relaxed experience. It's quick and easy to install and configure, and if you're looking for a perfect ATC solution, especially if you're using MSFS, I would definitely recommend PF3 as the way to go. So finally, that is my review of PF3 by Oncourse Software. Again, I'd like to thank Dave March for making this review possible and for very kindly providing me with this software for this review. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Leave me a like if you enjoyed the video, leave me a comment if you have any questions, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more flight sim videos such as this one. Bye for now.